Tales from the Beaver Dam, Mending the Breach. Late one summer's evening, on a bend in the Otter River, a few miles south of the little village of Tipton St. John, there was a scrabbling in the undergrowth. A blackbird dashed away from the thicket and sat nearby, glaring, uttering short, sharp alarm calls. In amongst the leaves and shadows, a pair of jet-black eyes peered out, followed by rounded furry ears and a snub, whiskery snout. "Nearly there," said Boris. "Right you are, dear," said Mara, the smaller beaver, who was bustling along the channel behind him. The pair were excavating another tunnel from the pond behind their dam into the surrounding forest. Boris, the male, reached up to drag down a slender branch of silver birch. He nipped through the wood as easily as a toast soldier and passed the branch backwards to his partner. Mara sank her teeth and claws into the bark and half dragged, half floated the branch along the water channel back towards the pond. They'd been working for an hour or two and had made good progress as night began to fall. On the far side of the pond, where the river flowed in, Mara and Boris's 4 kits were playing. Coppy, the eldest, had found a stand of fresh willow wands sprouting up from the base of a tree felled last year by their father, and he beckoned his brother Fletch and sister Poll to join in the feast. Chip, the youngest, swam across too, paws frantically paddling beneath the water, his nose wet and twitching above. They nibbled the delicious stems right down to the stump, and then dived into the dark silvered water to play. Fletch slipped smoothly underwater and scrabbled along the gravelly bottom. He loved the feeling of rough stones rubbing up and ruffling the fur on his tummy. Spotting a dark shape above him, he went into stealth mode, moving his tail gently from side to side to manoeuvre into position just beneath it. And then he shot up and bashed into his sister, flipping her almost out of the water. They both landed back in a spluttery splash. Poll was not best pleased, so she chased him out of the water, along a fallen tree trunk, and back into the little pool on the far side, where he went bounding into the woods, scooting into the hollow of a log, where he sat, taunting her and laughing. She was a little bit too big to fit. Chip and Coppy paddled over to join them and were giggling at the scene, when suddenly they heard a deep cry. "Breach! Breach!" It was their father sounding the alarm. The kits stood on their hind legs for a moment, each frozen, ears up, their eyes bright, and all at once they fell on all fours, bounding over each other in their race to reach the water. They dived in one after the other, the moonlight in the pond shattering like glass. Paws paddling and tails propelling them along, they swam as fast as they could towards the sound of their parents. Mara had been contentedly gnawing through a particularly delicious 3-year-old ash tree, with eyes closed the better to savour the sweet cambium sap, when her ears had twitched. Instead of the constant, barely audible silvery trickle, the river had changed its tune. It sang out a new song, a jangling, jostling gallop of liquid gurgles, an unmistakable sound that meant only one thing. The dam had been broken. "Breach! Breach!" Boris had taken up the cry, and the 2 beavers pounded their way heavily through the undergrowth and slipped into one of the many deep channels they had carved through the wet land into the main pool. Heavy fur plastered sleekly to their bodies, they powered through the water to the dam. There was the problem. A large log had worked its way loose, and the water from the upper pond was joyfully rushing through the gap. As soon as the kits reached them, the family worked together like a well-oiled machine. Boris dashed into the woods, chipping away at the far side of a young tree, so that the trunk would fall towards rather than away from the pond. When it did, Mara selected some of the smaller branches and quickly cut them free. These, the kits, grabbed as best they could with their little paws, and all 6 of them pushed, dragged, floated and heaved the branches into position to plug the gap. They then took turns diving to the bottom of the pond, and scooping up great armfuls of mud and gravel to pack tightly against the wall of the dam. As they patted the last paurfuls into place, the moon hung low in the sky, and the first birds were beginning to stir. The kits yawned mightily as their parents shooed them towards the lodge, and then they dived one by one to the underwater entrance. They hauled themselves out and shook their wet fur before making their way along the rush-lined passageway to the innermost chamber, which was snug and dry, lined with leaves and fur, feathers and spider's silk. With a certain amount of jostling, nudging and elbowing for position, Coppy, Fletch, Poll and Chip nestled together in a heap. "Did you remember to sharpen your teeth?" asked Mara. "Yes, Mama," said the kits, and they bared their front teeth at her so she could admire their bright orange incisors. "Will you tell us a story?" said Chip, and the others joined in. "Story, story." Mara settled herself on her haunches, scratched her tummy comfortably with her sharp claws, and put on what the children called her special voice, the soft, strong, sing-song lilt that she reserved for those stories sacred to Beaver kind, tales of power and mystery, and the green beating heart of the wood. "In the beginning," she began. "In the time, before there was a moon to rise or a sun to set, before wind or rain—" "Before scent or song," piped up Poll. "That's right, before scent or song, the earth was a shoreless, landless world. And through this world, through the still, dark waters, swam the great god Perun. He swam and he swam, and he swam to the ends of the earth and back again, only there was no earth. He swam and he swam to the farthest stars in the sky, only there were no stars and there was no sky. And Perun was filled with rage and loneliness. And so he opened his great mouth and bit into the darkness and felt the sap begin to rise. He gnawed at the black air until it split and yielded and fell with a crash into the light. With his right paw he let loose the thunder, and with his left a great bolt of lightning. And with one beat of his huge tail, Mount Golishka rose up out of the waters. Perun created day and night, sun and moon, heat and cold, dry and wet. But the seas lay quiet with no island in sight, and the land lay parched and dry. By day the sun stood at noon and no shadows were cast. And by night it was always midnight. In this divided world, Perun reigned supreme. He sat upon his throne in the heavens and was pleased. One day he took to sharpening his mighty axe against the mountain's ridge. With each stroke, a shower of sparks fell upon the earth below, and wherever a spark touched the land, a tree sprang up. Perun was delighted with his new creations, the strength of their trunks, the hardness of the wood, and the dancing light of their leaves. The trees grew drunk on his admiration. They grew so thickly together their trunks stood straight like prison bars, and the canopy of their leaves was so thick no light could reach the earth, and a second time of darkness reigned. From the tips of their branches they could see the heavens and desired a place for themselves. "Are we not also gods?" they reasoned, powerful, beautiful, all-knowing. The trees stretched upwards, clawing past the clouds, and tore at the sky. They grabbed at the sun and ensnared the moon in their twigs. Finally, Perun had had enough. "I shall teach these trees a lesson," he declared. He scraped a fistful of dust and spat in it to make a ball of mud. Then, in his own image, he shaped an animal whose pelt was dense and thick, able to withstand the cold of winter. He fashioned clever, dexterous claws which could grip and tear, shape and make. In its head he set a magnificent pair of teeth forged from iron smelted in the heart of a volcano and burnished to the colour of the setting sun. At its tail he set 2 jewels that exuded an intoxicating perfume. Finally, he pressed the tail flat under his broad thumb and breathed it into life. And beaverkind was born. The beavers immediately set to work, gnawing the base of the tree trunks. One after another the trees fell to the ground. Gaps appeared in the canopy, and sunlight fell upon the earth. As the piles of wood grew, new uplands were created, and the beavers scraped valleys and ditches with their powerful claws. Water began to flow upon the earth, for now there were higher places and lower, and therefore the possibility of movement. And with the water's flow came fish, whose bright scales played with the rainbow light of waves and ripples. And with the fish came birds to prey upon them, and mayflies for them to feed upon. Rushes and reeds sprang up on the river's banks, and wildflowers burgeoned in this wetland wood. The trees were angry that this small, scurrying creature could bring them down, and they howled in anguish and fought back with all their might. From their stumps they sent out bold new green shoots, determined to reclaim their heavenly place. And the beavers laughed, for their fight made them more abundant, more delicious, and easier to eat. And the rivers flowed outwards, and the land was nourished, and the canopy was opened, and the light flooded in. And all the world was dappled in light and shade, damp and glorious and green. And the sun and the moon now came together to dance with each other twice every day, in the lightening of dawn and the darkening of dusk. For the beavers had created twilight, and the planet itself turned and span in joy, and raced through the heavens to whirl with its star. And the great god Perun saw that the dam was good, and he said to the beavers that this would be their task, their life's work, and their noblest prayer: to sculpt the land so that the water could move upon it in mysterious ways, and all the creatures of the woodland could thrive and multiply. Thanks be to the beaver. The 4 kits had long since fallen asleep. Outside, the dawn teased white feathers of chilly air from the surface of the pond. A grey heron stood on one leg, poised, alert for fish or frog. And a fox picked its way through the bracken, ears pricked forward, as an owl glided home from its hunt. Mara and Boris took up their positions, one at the head and one curled around the tails of their 4 sleeping kits. Without waking up, Chip snuffled and let out a small sneeze. "Choo!" "Damn you," said Mara sleepily, softly, for in beaver tongue there is no higher blessing. And soon the whole family lay dreaming.